Hey folks, welcome back to the PlayAction podcast, sponsored by PlayActionPools.com. I'm your host, Christian McCullum. Big game this week, Notre Dame, Wisconsin. We had Iowa Sports Daily expert Jamie Uyama on before Notre Dame's Florida State game, and he led us astray. So we had to go above his head and bring in the main man, the boss at Irish Sports Daily, my boss, Mike Frank. Mike, thanks for joining us.
What's up, Chris? How are you, man?
I'm good. So, real quick, Notre Dame's season, the first couple games were pretty choppy and not necessarily very impressive. Last week's game against Purdue seemed like it might have been a step in the right direction. What are your thoughts on Notre Dame so far through 3 games?
Well, I think defensively they're figuring out what they need to do. I think they're starting to become a sound disciplined defense. They're making the tackles that they weren't making earlier in the year. They're filling the gaps that they were missing before. They're taking better angles to the ball. So defensively, I feel pretty good about where they're at. As long as they're healthy, I think that they have a real good chance to do well in this game on Saturday. Offensively, they've got a lot of great skill talent. And if they just could block, if the offensive line could just do a better job of pass protection and protecting Jack Coan, they'd have a very explosive offense. But unfortunately, they've really struggled with that. And I think last week they did a better job of it, but more important, I think they did a better job in the run game. And Notre Dame's going to have to find some yards in the run game in this game in order to win. And I think it's going to be real difficult. Wisconsin has a very stout run defense, ranked number 1 in the country. And so this is a very good Wisconsin team. There's no question about it. But Notre Dame has 2 outstanding backs. And what they really need to do is find a way to get these players out in space. You get Chris Tyree and you get Kyron Williams out in space and make these Wisconsin linebackers play athletically. Make them make athletic plays versus downhill plays. And I think if you put Tyree or Kyron Williams against some of their linebackers and safeties to make plays in space, Notre Dame's going to win that matchup almost every time. And that's really what they need to do. And then Notre Dame's skill players got to catch the football. They did a terrible job of it last week. Kevin Austin, we've been waiting. And I think fans are, their expectations are probably a little out of whack. This guy really hasn't played much football. So he's not going to be a polished, prospect at this point. He's going to have to develop. But they really need him to have a big game. They need Braden Lenzy to get open, make some big plays downfield. And then forever, I don't understand why they don't feed the ball to Avery Davis. Every time you give him the ball, he makes good things happen. And hopefully last week he earned Jack Coan's trust, because I think there's some matchups there with him in the slot where he can do some real damage. And so I'm hoping to see a lot of Avery Davis in this game as well.
Anybody that's followed Mike for years covering Notre Dame at Irish Sports Daily knows offensive line. That's what he preaches. Mike, you're big on that. And Notre Dame, they're young, they're inexperienced, and they've had to shuffle through guys. They're on their 3rd left tackle in 3 weeks. How difficult is that? And where do you think they're kind of starting to level off there and kind of get their feet wet?
Well, I think the big problem that Notre Dame has at the offensive line is they have a bunch of young and inexperienced players, and then they have some older players who have experience but just aren't really athletically gifted. And they're playing because the young guys behind them just aren't quite as developed as they need to be. And once those guys get developed, Notre Dame's offensive line should be back to the high quality that we've seen. But in the meantime, you have some guys out on the right side, in Kane Madden and Josh Lugg, who are playing hard, doing everything they can to be successful, but they're just not as athletically talented as previous guys they've had playing those positions. And so that's been the hard thing for Notre Dame, trying to figure out how do we protect these guys on the right-hand side? How do we give them help when it comes to pass rush? And, of course, when you got your 3rd left tackle, you're in the same boat there. So they have to do a good job of trying to help the left tackle as well. Jamie Uyama and I did a preview on this game for our podcast on Irish Sports Daily, and I don't think Notre Dame's going to be able to be in max protect in this game. You're not going to be able to leave 2 tight ends and a running back in. That only puts 2 people out in a route, and that's not a good situation for any offense to be in. So Josh Lugg, Kane Madden, whether it's Tosh Baker or it's Michael Carmody at left tackle, those guys have to do a better job and give Jack Coan the opportunity to deliver the football. If they can do that and they give Coan the opportunity, Notre Dame has more than enough skill talent to really put some pressure on this Wisconsin team. I think their defense is real solid, but I think Wisconsin's back end is suspect, and I don't think they match up well with Notre Dame's skill talent at wide receiver and certainly at tight end as well. Obviously,
Jack Coan, former Wisconsin quarterback, I feel like Brian Kelly did a pretty good job of kind of quieting down that, narrative going into the game. But, what are your thoughts on Coan and how he's performed through 3 games? And what do you think about the surge or the jolt that Tyler Buchner's been able to give him when he comes in there?
Well, I think Coan, if he played on last year's offensive line, would look really, really good right now. But unfortunately, he doesn't have that offensive line. And I think there are times where he holds onto the ball a little bit too much. But that's a lot of quarterbacks. And he needs to understand pressure and what's going on around him. He doesn't have the greatest pocket awareness right now. Kind of reminds me of Jimmy Clausen in that regard. Where Jimmy Clausen had all the talent in the world, but just didn't have a real good feel for the rush. But I think Coan's a little bit better at it, but just didn't have the best game last week. I think people, I don't know if you've ever jammed your finger, Christian, but when you had to pull the finger out, that hurts, and it swells up. And it takes a while for that to heal, and I think a lot of people felt, he'd be just fine. Well, I think it impacted his throwing a little bit last week. Wasn't quite the tight spiral we saw, and there was some underthrown balls. I just don't think he had the grip on the ball like he used to have. And so I'm hoping that this week it's a little bit better and he can be a little bit more accurate. But as far as Buchner goes, they're going to have to find a way to get him packages in the game. And what people don't understand is he's the 3rd string quarterback. You can't rep, your 1st string, 2nd string, and 3rd string during the week and expect everybody to play well. So Notre Dame's going to have to make a choice. I'm sure they already have, and have already talked to Drew Pine, the 2nd string quarterback, that, hey, we need to do this. We need to give Tyler more reps because he can help us win. So it depends on how many reps they've given Buchner. And then, of course, is his hamstring okay? We'll see. But what he has brought to the game has really, really helped in that he's been able to get to the perimeter where Notre Dame needs to be in this game. They need to be able to get outside to let their playmakers make plays, and Buchner's been able to do that, whether it be zone read, which Coan is not good at, or just flat running outside. The other thing that Notre Dame hasn't done well is set the edge at the tackles. Notre Dame was really good at that. They could run outside zone with guys like Robert Hainsey and Liam Eichenberg last year. But Tosh Baker and Josh Lugg have struggled to kind of get out to their reach blocks to set that outside edge. And so that's what's hurt Notre Dame as far as being able to run outside zone. They're going to have to do a better job of that this week, and they're going against some really talented defensive players at Wisconsin. We'll just have to see whether they can do that or not.
I was surprised the point spread was Wisconsin -6. I picked Notre Dame to win. What's your prediction?
I want to get a little more information on what's going on with Kurt Hinish. If I knew for a fact whether he was going to play, I'll probably pick Notre Dame. I just think Notre Dame has more skilled talent to make more plays. I don't think Wisconsin's played a great team. I don't think Penn State's a great team. I think they're kind of a middle-of-the-pack, top 15 type of team. I think Notre Dame's more talented than Penn State. But I think Penn State was a little bit better up front offensive line-wise than Notre Dame is, and that's going to be the difference. So if Hinish can play and they can slow down Wisconsin's run and Ches Malusi, as long as they can do that, Notre Dame will have a real good chance to win this game. And so I'm going to just say that Heinisch will play, and if he does, Notre Dame should win the game.
Okay. All right, guys. As always, irishsportsdaily.com, just a spot for all the Notre Dame stuff. As Mike mentioned, him and Jamie break it down. They have multiple shows now throughout the week, multiple Irish ISD Power Hour episodes, everything from breaking down last week's game, breaking down Brian Kelly's press conference, to previewing this week's games. So make sure you go over to irishsportsdaily.com and check out ISD Power Hour podcast. Mike, thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Chris.